Okay, I think that's everybody who was waiting let in now. So hello everyone, thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome you to a special Green Party Women Book Club event. Instead of our usual format, where we normally pick a book and then talk about the one that we've read, today we've got the author Milli Hill with us to talk about her new book, Ultra Processed Women. There's no expectation for you to have read the book. Hopefully, those who have read it will give you a bit more insight into the topics and whet the appetite, and that pun is intended for those who haven't actually yet read it. So I'll just go through the rough plan for the evening so you know what to expect. So in a minute, I'll introduce Millie properly, and then I'll be asking her some questions and we'll be chatting about the book. And then we'll include some time after that for some questions from the rest of you. I'm just checking to see if um, Jess from the committee is here because she did volunteer to actually field the questions. Um, I'm not sure. Are you here, Jess?
No, she's not here yet.
No, she's not at the moment. Um,
I'll
so
field the questions to you if Jess can't get in.
okay, all right. Thank you, Loppy. So that I can kind of concentrate on talking to Millie, we're going to have somebody else actually fielding the questions. So if something comes to you as we're talking, or if you've got something already planned to ask, um, if we can have the questions directly to, so shall I say directly to you then, Loppy, at the moment?
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
so if you click on Loppy's name uh, under the participants list, you can then click on that and then you can actually click on chat and send a message to her directly with your question. Um, and then we'll wrap up about 10 to 5 to 8 because that will then give us a few minutes for the regular book club attendees to propose and vote on the next fiction book for the September book club. And at that point, anyone who doesn't want to take part in that is welcome to leave. Um, we are recording the event, so the video will be put up on our YouTube channel for anyone who wants to watch it again or who can't come tonight. So that is happening at the moment. Okay, so I think we're ready to start. So, welcome, Millie. I'm just going to read a bit of a bio about her so you've got a bit of background information. So, Millie is a writer and freelance journalist with a passion for reframing the narrative around women's bodies. She's the author of the best-selling Positive Birth book, Give Birth Like a Feminist, and My Period for preteen girls. My daughter's read that one, and it's very good, thank you. Her fourth book, Ultra Processed Women, was published by HarperCollins in July this year, and she's got a fifth book following next year. So very busy at the moment. So to date, her books have been translated into 7 languages. From 2012 to 2021, she founded and ran the Positive Birth Movement, a global network of antenatal discussion groups aimed at improving birth and giving women better access to support and information. She ended this work in part due to the online abuse that she received as a result of advocating for sex-based language in maternity care. She's spoken nationally and internationally about positive birth, obstetric violence, and female autonomy in health. And as a journalist since 2013, she's been a columnist for the Telegraph Women's section and written for many other publications, including The Mail, Guardian, Independent, iPaper, and Mother and Baby, and has also appeared on BBC Breakfast News, BBC Radio 4, Radio 2, BBC Five Live, Talk Radio, LBC, and many leading podcasts. Busy lady. She writes 2 best-selling Substacks as well as all of that. What About Women, which is focused on her own life, feminism, and issues around sex and gender, including the erasure of women from language. And her newest one, which is Unprocessed, which is for anyone looking to explore a less processed plate and life. And Millie lives in Somerset with her partner, 3 children, and 2 dogs, as if she hasn't got enough to keep her busy. So, welcome, Millie. Thank you. We're absolutely delighted to have you here. Thank you for sparing the time to talk to us because it's a busy time of year with the school holidays, and obviously you've got lots of other promotional events on for the book. Um, I've got a few questions planned. We don't have to stick to those, we'll just see how the conversation goes. But
Sure.
I thought I'd start off just by getting a bit of background to why you wrote the book. So, because your other 3 books have been about pregnancy and birth and periods, so sort of focusing on women's reproductive health. So,
Yeah.
what inspired you to kind of move? You're still focusing on health, but move away from that. Was there a moment when you thought, oh, yes, I really must write about that for my next book?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, and it's really lovely to always be in these fantastic groups of women. So I'm really honoured to spend the evening with you. Um, how did I end up writing this book? Well, basically, as you pointed out, my other books have been more focused on, well, mainly childbirth, and then the period one for young girls. But then I was feeling, I suppose, that I wanted to branch out in my, thoughts and writing. So I did spend most of a year, not last year, but the year before. You get fuzzy on dates, don't you? Working on this other book, which is apparently going to come out now next year. They put that one on ice because they liked the ultra processed women idea so much. This is the publishers that I write most for. And so when I was writing that other book, it was more focused on the kind of the entire arc of women's lives. It's kind of a book about the female body and all of the stories around the female body from kind of cradle to grave, and all the negative messaging that we get. And then it kind of unpicks that and then tries to reframe it and talks about what, the reality of how incredible the female body is. And while I was writing that book, I was also going through my own perimenopause. And so that made me think a lot about my own body and how I was feeding it. Because, one of the things that I, write about in Ultra Processed Women is had the day that I Googled this question: how do women experience menopause in other cultures? And that was as part of that writing process. And when I Googled that, it kind of like opened up quite a whole new avenue of thought to me, because a bit like childbirth, when you say, how do women experience childbirth in other cultures, you suddenly, when you look outside your own bubble, you suddenly realize that around the world, women are having very different experiences of being female. And so not everything is because you're female. A lot of it comes from where you land, where you're born, where you are, what you're surrounded with culturally. So through thinking about that in my own menopause, I started to think about what I was eating. And then, the next thing that happened, I suppose, for a lot of us was this conversation about ultra processed food started. And so I thought that's interesting. And I got the book by Chris Van Tulleken, which I'm sure many of you would have read. And I read the book and I thought it's a brilliant book because it opens up this amazing conversation. But what about women? And I couldn't see any specific reference to women in there, apart from a little bit towards the end about breastfeeding. And I thought, wow, this is like a real blind spot again. And then I started with doing a bit of research, and I thought, I wonder if there's been any research or if there is any information out there about the specific impact on women's bodies. And that when you put that alongside the kind of like other cultural stuff around women and the kitchen and feminism in the kitchen and women's role and all of that, I thought that's actually quite an interesting topic. So that's how I had the idea. And when I put it forward to the publishers, they kind of bit my hand off, really, because they really liked it. So then I had to write it as fast as I could last year, and it nearly killed me. I had to eat lots of ultra processed food to comfort myself.
Actually, that's a good lead on to my next question, because I've always taken the approach that you said you had in the book, that there are no bad foods, that all foods are okay as part of a balanced diet, part of exercise. But your research sort of suggests otherwise, and that UPFs are kind of intrinsically bad. So to start off, for those of us who aren't actually sure how they differ from processed food, so what actually are they, and why are they so bad for us?
Okay, so ultra processed foods have been kind of categorized. The reason that we were able to be having this conversation now is because a guy called Carlos Monteiro in Brazil came up with this thing called a Nova scale, which is a way he only did it for researchers. So that researchers could look at the specific impact of ultra processed foods aside from any others. So he tried to categorize it. So um, processed foods are what we've been eating for millennia. You know, homemade apple pie is we've put it through a process. We've cooked it. We've you know, made pastry out of the flour and the butter. A jar of marmalade. You know, and anything that's been through a process. Smoked fish. Lots of the food that we eat is processed, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Ultra processed foods are in a whole separate category. They are the foods that have been made by big food companies with the key focus on profit rather than on human nutrition. So in those foods, you will find additives to either replace the more expensive ingredients. So, for example, if you buy a supermarket biscuit, and I know this very well because I have a son who's allergic to dairy, most supermarket biscuits are absolutely fine for him because they don't contain any butter. Well, if you've ever tried to make a biscuit at home, you'll know that butter is probably one of the most fundamental things that you can't really do it without. But a supermarket biscuit, a UPF biscuit, they don't want to be making them with butter because the biscuits will go off quickly, and butter costs a lot more money than all of these fats and oils that they use instead. You know, then there's emulsifiers, thickeners, all kinds of different extra ingredients. And what you end up with is a product that is quite unrecognizable as food if you landed here from a different time period, you know, in a time capsule, in a time machine, and you walked into a modern supermarket and you were from 100 years ago, even not that long ago, maybe even less. There's a lot of items on the shelves that you would not know what they were and you would not recognize as food. So that's what ultra processed food is. It's food that's got such a long way from the original apple, egg, glass of milk, you know, base whole food ingredients. Is that an okay explanation?
Yeah, I think so. It is quite shocking, isn't it? Because you pick up. I've started to look at ingredients now on packets of things,
Yeah.
and you think, well, it's you know, a pack of noodles or something. It's got to be quite pretty straightforward. And then there's this whole big long list, and there are some names there that look quite sort of scientific kind of names, but it's things that you haven't got a clue what it, you know, what it means.
Yeah,
And
that is the easiest way to find out, you know, to decide when you're in the shop if it's an ultra processed food or not, is to flip it over and look at the ingredients. And if there's something on those ingredients that you that you don't recognize or that you wouldn't find in a home kitchen, then basically it's ultra processed. I mean, I think there is room for nuance, and I write about this in the book. You know, when people are new to this topic, then that black and white thing of if it's got an ingredient that you don't have in your own kitchen, then it's ultra processed. I think that's helpful, and that's certainly how the researchers do it. You know, in terms of this Nova scale and everything. But I think that there are some foods which are so much more. You know, they're full of stuff. Whereas I hear, you know, people saying, well, what about my tin of kidney beans? It's got a you know, one thing in it extra, to a firming agent so that the beans don't go soggy in the water or whatever. And you think, well, I think if you're making a homemade chili and you're putting that can of beans in the chili, then it's probably all right. You know, you don't need to really get your. I mean, if you want to be an absolute purist, then that's absolutely fine. But I think, the main thing is we do all actually know what these foods are. I mean, we can make it complicated, but you know, if you're cooking at home from scratch, you're unlikely to be eating many ultra processed foods. If you're buying stuff in packets, often that's making health claims, ironically, on it, then you're likely to be straying into UPF territory. And there are some rogue ones that people are surprised by, like obviously sliced bread. Sometimes, you know, it's quite ubiquitous in most people's lives. Flavored yogurts, ice cream, tubs of ice cream, lots of things like that people sometimes think, oh, it's expensive and it's high level brand, it's probably fine. But there are some that are still ultra processed, and people don't necessarily always realize.
Yeah, so thinking about like the advertising, you mentioned that they're sometimes advertised as being sort of low in fat and sort of high in protein.
Yeah.
So that's the advertising these days tends to be focused on the kind of the health and sustainability. So also, it's something that's plant-based. Whereas back in the kind of 1950s, when these sort of foods were sort of starting to become more popular, it was focused on things like, helping housewives save time on food preparation and liberating them from the kitchen.
Yeah.
I just wondered, have these foods had any kind of positive impact in these areas at all? I mean, have they helped women, escape from the kitchen and spend their time on other things? Or are they all bad? Have they just completely had a negative effect on every aspect?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think we can ever say that. I mean, ultra processed food is a massive category, and to say that the whole of it, all of it, everything has had a terrible effect would be oversimplifying things. But I don't I don't think, looking around at my sort of fellow women in my generation now, that we are necessarily we have more time than we than we used to. We all seem to be really, really overstretched. So I mean, it's a bit like the thing about AI liberating us all from having jobs that we hate, but and allowing wouldn't it be great if AI did all the jobs that nobody wants and made us free to all be really creative and be artistic and spend our days like writing poetry? But that's not what's the intention of AI seems to be. It seems to be moving in quite fast on the poetry writing. So um that's what's going slightly off topic, but in a way it isn't, because I think when I was writing the book, the thing that really struck me the most is not so much the kind of nuts and bolts of like flipping over the packet and is it bad for me or is it not bad for me and what is in it that is bad for me and that kind of stuff, which is important. But the bigger picture of it seemed to me to suddenly really ring a bell with like the state of where we all are as humans right now. And the disconnection from other humans that we are experiencing, and the disconnection from nature that we are experiencing, and the damage to the environment that we are experiencing is all absolutely intrinsically wrapped up in these ultra processed foods and in our move away from the kitchen. And I guess that makes it complicated, because I'm not suggesting, of course I'm not, that women should go back to being housewives, but that's again is oversimplifying things, because women weren't housewives because of having to cook. They were housewives because of patriarchy. Their rights were taken away from them by men. They were not allowed to have the further education they wanted or the opportunities they wanted. They were made to give up their jobs when they got married. Ultra processed food wasn't really necessarily anything to do with that ending. That ended because women fought for their rights. So yeah, it's a complex picture, but I think that the key point for me is that if we don't all have to return to the kitchen and be sweating over these amazing dinners every night, but if we are paring things down and making things more simple, I think it is a kind of like a way of rebelling against the current situation where everybody's sitting in separate rooms on little screens. Bringing people together around a table to actually eat real food and look each other in the eye is quite a beautiful and important human experience. And we do it through food. Humans have always done it through food. Food is a way of connecting to nature and connecting to each other. And that is one of the things that we all need to do more of. And it's also about mindfulness, is the other thing, which people talk about all the time. Mindfulness. Well, we must do some more mindfulness. But mindfulness in the supermarket is what's happening when you're pushing the trolley around. Are you connecting to the plants and the animals and the world that you live in that have enabled you to put those items in your trolley? Or is it just all wrapped in plastic and you're just not thinking about it? You haven't got that connection to the bigger picture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have to admit that when I go shopping, I just try and get it done as quickly as possible because I hate going food shopping. But yeah, so I mean, I suppose the food companies are, their main concern is profit, isn't it? And
Yeah.
but they kind of tap into that kind of guilt that women have about making sure they're feeding their families properly and healthily, and they're, I guess, also, guilt about impact on the environment. There's a lot of guilt seems to be involved.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and you see that in their advertising, that they sort of
mm,
they sell two ideas at once. One, that you don't have to be a woman in the kitchen, but two, that women are in the kitchen. Like the Dolmio family as a sort of classic example of the sort
mm,
of the wholesome woman stirring the pot kind of thing is very, very utilized by food companies, but it's almost like it's a puppet. It's very
mm,
interesting psychology.
yeah. And I suppose one thing that I kind of realized sort of reading the book is that well, so one thing that I didn't sort of really think about is the fact that, baby formula is a ultra processed food. And kind of wanted to read out a quote. So he said, on the subject of breastfeeding and formula, I know how divisive it can be, but I don't think this means we should be afraid of discussing it. And I picked that out particularly because I think that sentiment will resonate tonight, as quite a lot of the women in the Green Party, believe that it's important to have difficult conversations and debate about issues. So that's a slight aside there. But I'd never considered that formula is ultra processed, and it kind of really made me realize how entrenched these foods are in our lives, from birth for some of us. Um, so, what can be done about that? I mean, there are some women who either are unable or don't want to breastfeed, but then have feelings of guilt about having to feed their babies ultra processed food. I mean, is there an alternative? How do we support those women?
Well, I mean, I tried to steer away from sort of focus on individual choices as much as possible in that chapter, and made it quite clear at the
Mm,
beginning of that chapter that I wanted to look at the tactics of the food companies, many of whom make formula as well as other products for adults, and keep that focus and any blame on them, because women, have enough guilt laid at their doors for their choices. And breastfeeding, it is a complicated topic, and a very emotive topic, but certainly one of the statistics that we do know is that 80% of women in the UK, for example, stop breastfeeding before they want to. So we have a real dire lack of support in this country for women who want to breastfeed. A lot of women do want to breastfeed, and they come out of the experience feeling like their bodies let them down. But in fact, usually they've been let down, A, by a system that doesn't really put any funding into supporting women to breastfeed, and B, by a huge multinational, international industry, billion-dollar industry, trillion-dollar industry, that profits from them not succeeding at breastfeeding. I hate using the word success and failure, but so it is in formula companies' interests for women to be unable to breastfeed. And I write in the book about how interesting it is that formula milk companies in this country, I mean, the way they exploit women in outside of this country, and have done historically, is also in the book, and is also a huge area of discussion. But in this country today, if you go on one of the formula milk websites, you will find breastfeeding advice. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Why would they want to give women help to breastfeed? But if you start reading the breastfeeding advice on their website, you'll find that they make it sound, little by little, bit by bit, they make it sound difficult and complicated. They talk to women about what special diets they're going to have to be eating, what they're going to have to do about nipple pain, what they're going to have to do about this, what they're going to do. By the time you get to the end of the page, you can just sort of see yourself feeling like, blimey, this breastfeeding thing sounds really, really hard. And it's a very, very subtle message. But of course, it's in their interest to get that out, those ideas out in the world. So it's very, very exploitative, the formula milk industry. And so it's not women, women who don't want to breastfeed. That's absolutely fine. I mean, we all make these choices, don't we? I give my kids some UPF because they like it, and because I didn't always know what I know now, and so it's become a habitual part of their lives. Yes, I feel guilty about some of that, and nobody is perfect and nobody can be this wonder person or wonder woman who does everything right in inverted commas, and I'm certainly not that woman either. But yeah, it's an exploitative industry. I think it instills in all of us the idea that food in a packet is, I mean, my dad said to me, this is a long time ago, and RIP my dad, he's not with us anymore. But when I was breastfeeding, he said to me, he asked me whether I wasn't sure that formula milk wasn't better than breast milk. And I said, well, of course it's not. And he said, well, they spend a lot of time, making it, in a factory, and, scientists are involved and everything. So maybe it is better. And I think that idea that, it's because it's made industrially and in a factory and there's super shiny stainless steel everywhere and there's scientists in white coats, that goes for our food as well. We sort of maybe it helps us to have confidence in all of these things in packets. And now we've got a huge problem with toddler food and baby food and this whole idea of snacking. Everybody has to have little packets of snacks, little melty puffs. Well, what do those little organic carrot melty puffs that we give our kids look like? Wotsits, so they're just baby Wotsits. And so then you normalize the idea of all the little round biscuits and the little Wotsits and everything. It all gets instilled in us. All of this stuff in packets is we can trust it. It's probably better than what we could make ourselves. It's great. We need to have it in our lives.
Yeah. And I think what struck me sort of, about the chapters where you look at things like obesity and autoimmune conditions, mental health, and female microbiomes and menopause is that how much we still don't actually understand about our bodies. I mean, something for me that I was really surprised about was the link between bacteria in your mouth and pregnancy issues, which had never even occurred to me that could be a thing. It was a huge revelation. So, there are. I'm just looking. I made some notes, some examples. So, there were sort of higher cases of depression in women linked to sort of gut microbiomes, but UPS actually disrupt that microbiome and therefore could be a factor in sort of these higher cases of depression in women. And there's links between sort of estrogen and the sort of gut-brain axis, and so women have greater hormone fluctuations than men, so that can be an issue as well. So I mean, it seems that one of the issues is that we need sort of more research into women's health, but I think there isn't a lot of funding. The funding tends to go towards men's health. So are things changing in that area? Is research into women's health becoming, more important? Is there more funding for it? Is more of it happening?
Well, I'm not across all of it. I mean, I think there is a constant low hum of conversation that has been over the past sort of decade or so and more probably, of women saying, what I've said in the book, what about women, and pointing out the lack of research into the female body. But obviously we've got quite a few decades to catch up on where we're using male cells, male mice, male everything in studies, because the female body was thought to be too kind of unpredictable and cyclical. So the male default was used even at a kind of cellular level. But when you were talking, I was reminded of your original question of why I wrote this book, and I think it was another one of the light bulb moment, I suppose, as well, was one of those things of like the problem with the female body. I can't believe those words just came out of my mouth. The issue that we have is that often the assumption is it's because they're female that they're having these problems, and that the female body is just medicalized throughout life, and that was the thing that interested me about this topic as well, was what if it's food? I mean, again, I'm not suggesting that in every case, just literally changing diet would be a miracle cure for whatever a woman is going through. But I think we do tend to think of women as being just just dismissing women's health problems as just, oh well, that's women get that, and women who do, like, say for example, women who have more painful periods, we might describe them as like, why? I mean, when I was at school, there was lots of us, and I was at an all-girls school, and some of us had really awful painful periods, and some of us, I was one of the ones who didn't have any period pain really at all, and then there was a whole spectrum in between. Well, why? you know and this idea is like, oh, you're so lucky, you don't get period pain. But it can't just be luck. There's got to be more to it than that. And so those women who are suffering, it's just like, oh, well, you drew the short straw. Why do some women have easy, in inverted commas, childbirths, and some women don't? Why do some women find it difficult to breastfeed and some women don't? Why do some women, have depression and some women don't? Why do some women sail through menopause and some women don't? All of these things, we just put it down to like, oh, luck of the draw, it's all just really too complicated for us to really understand. So we're just not going to bother trying.
Yeah, I had issues with really big fibroids, and I think on one of I think it was on your Substack, I think you mentioned something about I think I responded to I replied to it on your Substack, I think somewhere, and saying that when I was being treated, no one ever mentioned diet. No one ever suggested that that could be, something to even just try and experiment with and see whether that made any difference. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Yeah, hopefully in the future that there'll be, for a lot of these sort of health issues, say, diet could be a factor, and it's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, it's a low risk / no risk
Yeah.
thing to try, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're struggling to conceive, if you've got fibroid, or you're having a really hard time in menopause,
Yeah.
try it. Try 3 weeks of not eating any ultra processed food and see what happens.
Yeah.
It can't hurt you.
Yeah.
Unlike many other things that you might be suggested you try.
Yeah, and it's a relatively low cost thing rather than all these various supplements and other things that can be, really expensive and
Yeah. I mean, the cost thing is really interesting. I know you had that down as one of your sort of areas maybe to talk about, so we'll just briefly mention that. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I have been doing this Substack called Unprocessed, and one of the things I'm doing on that is I'm taking sort of standard UPF things and making them in my own kitchen and working out how much they cost and versus the UPF version. And so far, every single one of them has been a lot cheaper to make at home than the UPF version. And I found that interesting. And I wish I did it when I was writing the book, but I didn't have time. It's like, I thought about it. I was like, no, I can't do that. I'm too busy writing. But there is this idea that, you hear a lot, and I do wonder if it isn't quite convenient for food companies if that rumor keeps being spread that, oh, ultra processed food's so much cheaper, because actually sometimes it really isn't. I mean, it depends what you're trying to cook. And I think that's another thing that's interesting to think about, is that we've all, because of ultra processed food, one of the things we have got into the habit of is being able to, have whatever we want for dinner. So if you want to have a curry, if you want to have a Chinese, if you want to have a pizza, if you want to have a pie, if you want to have a quiche, all of these things, you can just pick them up off the shelf and put them in the trolley. And so we're used to saying, what's for dinner tonight? Oh, tonight it's lasagna. Tomorrow night it's beef pie. And then it's salmon en croûte. Then it's this. Then it's Chinese thing. And if you do try and replicate that yourself in your own kitchen, that's actually quite high level skills needed. To cook a sort of Chinese banquet, you're going to need to go on a steep learning curve, and it will be expensive. But if you pare things down to a more of sort of Mediterranean approach of like a really good quality, nice piece of fish, a salad, and some new potatoes, it really isn't that difficult to make, And so I think that's part of it, is we've just become lulled into this sense of like having to have all these, and we think of it as variety, but actually it's not really variety. It's quite a lot of the base ingredients are the same. They're just dressed up in different sauces and flavorings.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of move away from that for a bit, because and come to the issues, kind of the links of violence against women and girls, because that's one of Green Party Women's aims, is to kind of raise awareness of that issue. So I was I found the analogies that you drew between the UPF manufacturers and abusive partners quite interesting, um, and a bit worrying. So could you explain that idea a bit more?
Okay, so yeah, that's a chapter called Breaking Up with Ben and Jerry,
Mm.
which is it's mostly about obesity, that chapter. Um, I guess I don't want to in any sense undermine the seriousness of abusive relationships with men. But it did strike me when I was looking at that area, that it does mirror the relationship that some of us have with ultra processed food, does mirror that kind of power dynamic and pattern that where we get stuck in a situation where we think this is good for us, and the person that we're with is keeps reinforcing to us that we need them and we can't live without them, and they are good for us, and we kind of know in our heart that something isn't right, but we kind of we get we're the relationship weakens us to the point where we find it difficult to escape, and so we get stuck in this kind of like negative loop. And I think that is exactly what ultra processed food does. So I guess through that analogy, what I was trying to say to women was, once you the other place the analogy holds up is that once you suddenly see, oh my God, this relationship is really toxic, you're 50% out. You've done half the work of leaving. And that it's that light bulb, that waking up where you just think, I am being played. This ultra processed food company or man does not have my best interests at heart. They actually are damaging me. When you see that, it actually helps you to make that move, to break free. Certainly how it's worked in my personal experience is that some of it just what's what previously seemed appealing, like say a cheeky McDonald's, I just can't. I'm not in love with it anymore. I'm not. I can't. I don't want that anymore. I see it for the toxic relationship that it is. So I hope that makes sense. That
Mm.
analogy. Does that
Yeah.
make? Have I
And
explained
yeah,
that?
and there was also kind of a literal connection that I picked up on as well, because I think we don't want to get, to um, too serious a topic, but childhood sexual abuse often can lead to sort of binge eating disorders, and those binges tend to involve ultra processed food. So there is kind of, there's the analogy, and then there's a literal connection as well, which is quite
Yeah,
shocking. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. I mean, well, a lot of us women really hate our bodies, and sometimes when we feel like that, the food plays a role in that
Mm.
sort of self-loathing, doesn't it?
Mm.
So we also need to kind of break that cycle as well. Some of
Mm.
us do. It's yeah.
Um, you've mentioned a bit already about giving people a sort of tools and things that they can use. So your subset, you've got recipes and things like that. Because I love the focus that in the book on actually giving women the kind of the knowledge and the tools to actually sort of make some changes in the areas that we do have control over. So you've got like a pyramid of change, which I saw is very similar to kind of Maslow's hierarchy of need, where you've got at the bottom, you've got just kind of, eating sort of ultra processed foods and gradually going up. And I liked the 80-20 kind of ratio where sort of, 80% sort of not ultra processed food and 20% ultra processed, because as you said, having the odd thing with maybe one ultra processed ingredient in it as part of a meal cooked from scratch isn't going to be ever so harmful. But the main reason was because I was really shocked to find that gin is actually an ultra processed food, and I was horrified. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't drink gin anymore.
Well,
Not that
Zoe,
gin is 20% of my diet, But I thought, well, if I'm going to kind of carry on drinking gin, I'm going to go for the 80/20. So I don't know, could you explain a bit more
80,
about?
no, it's 80 tonic, 20 gin was what I meant. No, I mean gin, that's a really good example of one of those sort of areas where that it's the Nova scale is applied, and you know it's I mean it falls into the category of a UPF, but I really do think that if it's important to you, then you definitely don't want to be giving it up. The tonic, on the other hand, who knows, if it's slimline, then oh dear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think with the sort of the pyramid of change and everything, I think is change is really hard, and I think one of the most important things is for women to, you know, and a lot of women listening tonight may be already there, you know, they're already, you know, especially if you're involved in this movement, you know, you might already be thinking a lot about the environment, and you might already be thinking a lot about what you're eating, and that's great. But I didn't really want to speak to you, if that makes sense, with this book. I mean, I did because it's interesting information for everyone, but I also wanted to include people who, you know, are completely immersed in the ultra processed food trap, and for those people who are really leaning on it, and have always known it, and it's always been part of their lives, it is really difficult to break out of that. And actually, there's a really interesting bit some couple of researchers I spoke to in the book about how it actually can affect the brain, a part of the brain called the hippocampus. And if we're eating a lot of ultra processed food, that the hippocampus shrinks, and that bit of the brain is involved in kind of like memory and learning. And so the shrinking of the hippocampus can make it harder for us to do things like make good decisions, or make the decision we plan to make, or remember why we were going to make that decision, or remember to stop eating when we're full, and all of these things. So the more we're eating the UPF, that we are literally trapped in these vicious circles. You know, ultra processed food can make us obese, which can give us low body image, and then we can think, what's the point? So we just eat more of it, or it can affect our sleep patterns. So we feel exhausted, and then we just think, oh, all I want to eat is a salty, fatty pizza and a tub of ice cream because I'm so tired. So all of these things trap us in these negative loops, and getting out of those can be really difficult, I think. And it's important not to feel like it's an all or nothing thing, because I think as soon as you set people up and say this is an all or nothing thing, you have to give it all up, then people are going to feel like they're just, oh, I can't do that, it's too hard. So I think it's good to just come in at the bottom of the pyramid and stay there if you want to, you know, even if you're just making small swaps, like stop drinking Pepsi soda or whatever you want to call it. That would be an amazing change for a lot of people. So
Yeah. And I'm aware of the time, and we want to allow other people to ask some questions as well. So I'm just going to ask sort of my final one now. So we've talked quite a lot about health so far, but the book, you know, covers other issues like how they affect the planet, all levels from like individual, you know, our individual health to our women as a sex class, the planet, the environment. And concerns about the impact on the environment, apparently, I think it said in the book, started in sort of the 1970s, so it's not anything new. And you know, the situation's got worse, and everything is so interlinked. It's really hard to kind of, you can't look at different aspects of it on their own. It's all really entrenched. It just seems so overwhelming to try and work out what you can actually do. How do we actually, you know, do something about this? So, you know, is it a case of just focusing on our own diets? I mean, that's obviously the starting point. But looking at it from like a Green Party and a Green Party women perspective, it got me thinking about, you know, what as a group can we do? I mean, I was thinking about things like ensuring that ultra processed food and women and, you know, the effects on women are actually considered in our party's health policies and food policies and things like that. You know, is that the right way to go? It's really hard because I read this book and I just got really overwhelmed. It's like, oh my goodness, it's such a big thing. You know, what can we do? And then it's like, no, you have to kind of take a step back and kind of think, well, I can change my diet, but what else can we do as a wider sort of society, a wider group, as an organization?
Yeah. Well, I think it is quite overwhelming. And I have to say, when I wrote the chapter about the environment, that was when I felt the most overwhelmed. I just thought, oh my God, what on earth are we doing? And how can you sort of stop? It's like trying to stop a freight train, isn't it, with your bare hands? That feeling of complete powerlessness that we all feel anyway at the moment about things like global warming. You know, a lot of us finding that really hard to think about, aren't we? And you know, so I can't come along with a magic wand, unfortunately, and say, do this and it will fix everything. I wish I could, but I do think that us having this conversation tonight, you know, you have to believe in the ripples of change, and how small things that can add up. So having these conversations, you know, when I was feeling really overwhelmed, I thought, Millie, you're writing this book, so you are doing something to help. You know, everyone can do something. And so if it's your shopping trolley, those companies are already listening. I've already seen products in supermarkets that say not no ultra processed food or something. That they're waking up to the fact that people are flipping over, looking at the ingredients, and sometimes that's a good thing. Other times they're trying to find ways to, you know, clean up the label so it doesn't look so odd. And it sounds more like something your granny would have had in a kitchen. But anyway, you know, so us doing these small things at a personal level does have a ripple effect. But I think also, obviously, as an organized group, as you are, then, you know, 100% anything you can do to lobby for change at a higher level, you know, would be great. Whatever ideas people have, all of it puts on pressure in different ways, doesn't it? And it says, you know, whether it's just cooking a meal and looking everyone in the eye, you know, that might be your act of rebellion, or it might be, you know, starting a campaign, or, you know, writing a Substack, or doing, you know, something else political.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to see if I can have a look in the chat. I think Loppy's been now this is where my lack of technical skill comes in, because I'm not sure how to see. I think oh, hang on. Right. Okay.
I put them in your personal questions.
I found them. Thank you, Loppy. Yeah. So I'm not sure how many of these we'll be able to get through. So we've got a question from, it says from Zoe. Is that from Zoe? Do manufacturers ever change the names of ingredients to fool the public? And I think you kind of touched on that a bit just then, didn't you, really, about cleaning up the labels?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that that's being considered, but I don't know any. I don't have any specific examples, but I think I think that almost the Chris Van Tulleken book has made such an impact in particular that I think that's, you know, and that was a couple of years, or 2 or 3 years ago now, that he wrote that. So I think that will happen. It's something to watch for.
Okay.
But it might also be in a positive way. It might be that they think, shit, we can't really put all this rubbish in these biscuits anymore. We're going to have to start using something a bit less.
Let's hope it goes that way. So another question. So you gave the example of butter being replaced by cheaper alternatives. And this is the main reason for ultra-processed food, to provide cheap food with little nourishment. So what's the main advice to those on low incomes who therefore have less consumer choice? And I think that's from Alex.
Well, keep it simple. Keep, like I was saying, you know, lower your expectations in a way of um, of what makes a meal, and try to think more, you know, back to basics. I think that can be cheap, you know, pasta with homemade tomato sauce, that kind of thing can be, you know, a cheap, easy meal. And I think, as you know, with expectations as well, like we're talking about biscuits and putting oils in them and everything, you know, people have an expectation now that they're going to have biscuits and cake easily to hand whenever they want, which 50 years ago we wouldn't have had that expectation. So I think we just I mean, I don't really want to sit in my ivory tower and tell people who are on a really low income and struggling what to do, because I feel uncomfortable doing that. But I think all of us can start to think differently about food, really, and about what it means to us, and moving away from maybe thinking, we can all, no matter what our income, think about how we're spending our time. Lots of people say they haven't got time to make food, but actually the stats say we're all spending an awful lot of time on our phones. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I feel uncomfortable with the idea of like sort of preaching to people about what they should do to get right, and as if I'm perfect and it's easy, and I'm not perfect and it isn't easy. But I think going back to basics a bit more and thinking about food the way our great grandparents thought about it. I mean, I spoke to a woman in the book who's written a whole book about foraging, and she lived for a whole year off foraged food. I'm not suggesting anyone does that either, but it did get me thinking, because I thought, wow, she was saying, look, we've just really lost touch with nature. Nobody would dare, most people wouldn't dare eat anything they found growing in a field or in a hedge anymore, because we just think, it didn't come from a supermarket in a packet. I can't
you
eat
wouldn't
that.
be confident that you weren't going to poison yourself either.
Well, exactly. Yeah, we've lost all that knowledge as well,
Yeah.
so we don't really know what we can eat, and what's safe for us to eat. But yeah, that and the other person I spoke to in that chapter that was quite interesting was the guy who rode his kayak up the coast of Greenland and ate an Inuit diet the whole time he was doing it, and became much healthier. Not because he was doing loads of rowing every day. His microbiome improved. He became healthier by every metric, and that's challenged this idea of variety. I think. I mean, he was just eating a lot of fish, basically, no fruit and vegetables at all. So it's interesting. I think there's lots of thinking outside of the box that we need to all do about food, and what we're eating.
We have a question from Harriet. Could you expand on thoughts about menopause bloating? So I'm experiencing this and have not found a way to combat it. I'm trying to eliminate some foods, but would love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I know anything about menopause bloating. I'm sorry. I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to know what you're eating, what your diet is like, but it sounds like you're already thinking about these things and it's not working. I don't know. I'm sorry, it's too complicated. I can't give that kind of level of advice.
Bit too specific, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it would be good to chat. I mean, feel free to email me and I'll chat to you a bit more, but it sounds like it's I don't really know why that might be, and without asking lots more questions.
Well, if anybody does have any questions that we don't get a chance to cover tonight, then if they'd like to email us, then we can obviously pass them on and
Yeah, or you can just find my email on my website, or you can come
right,
find me on Substack.
Okay.
I'm always happy to chat.
Okay. Got a couple more here, I think. So, Sarah, so got a statement and then a question. So the most commonly used cell line for research is HELA, which was from a cervical tumor taken from an African American lady called Henriette Lack. Oh, so that's come from her name. Okay, so cell line research is done on women's cells. But historically, researchers did not want to use female candidates because of fluctuating hormone levels, meaning they can't tell whether an effect is from the drug or from the hormones. So do you know if scientists are working out ways to track and take into account the hormone differentials, since these obviously do affect the effects of medications that have gone through clinical trials using only males?
No, is the short answer. That's a great question, but no, I don't know what's being done about that. I have no idea. Sorry.
So need to do some research elsewhere on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, some interesting things coming up.
I mean, I have to say, I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a health guru. I mean, I'm just a writer, and and I research things and I write. So if that's a really interesting question, I would love to research more about that, but it's not, I don't have any working knowledge of that sort of thing, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry.
No worries, thank you. So Mandy says, I was struck by hearing Millie say that she discovered that some seemingly healthy fruit and oat bars you used to buy for her children were actually UPF. Do you think that the UPF food companies are deliberately targeting our desire for healthy foods, especially for our children? So from what you've been saying so far, it seems that possibly yes.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And in fact, the more health claims on the packet, the more likely the food is to be UPF. I mean, that's 100% true. And often that sort of labeling is targeted at women, as the questioner points out, either implying that it's healthy for our children, like all the baby food being organic, etc. That's, I think, is part of the same thing, and all the kind of like the stuff that's targeted at women, like low fat and skinny this and skinny that, is all playing on women's body insecurities. Did you know that Diet Coke, there's Diet Coke and then there's Coke Zero? Coke Zero is the same product as Diet Coke, almost identical, but they created Coke Zero because they thought that men wouldn't want to buy a product labeled diet. I think that's just tells you like everything you need to know, really, doesn't it? About...
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
well, so we are kind of running slightly over time. I hope that the regular book club attendees don't mind if I just finish off the last couple of questions. We've got two more here. So many people in the this is from, sorry, bear with me. I want to make sure I credit this to the right person. So Zoe has asked, many people in the Green Party will be vegan, but lots of vegan foods can be ultra processed, often
Yeah.
are. How do we resolve this problem?
Well, I think if you want to be vegan, you need to look at ways to get your a balanced diet without leaning on these plant-based products, because that whole plant-based section of the supermarket, I'm sorry, is UPF central. If you're buying stuff in packets that's like fake bacon, fake cheese, fake yogurt, all of those sorts of vegan products, and I'm very familiar with some of them because, like I said, I have a kid with allergies. He's allergic to dairy, so we often buy vegan products because he's also allergic to egg. So some vegan cakes, for example, are perfect for him. So I know the territory. But yes, I would be looking more towards whole foods, lentils, pulses, that kind of stuff, and vegetables, uh, rather than buying the pretend versions of the meat or the milk. Having said that, with the milk, for example, the plant-based milk, if you look, you can find some that are not UPF, and I know this from personal experience, and actually one of the ones that isn't is the cheapest one in Aldi, which is a soya milk. I know some people may not want soya, but it's only soya beans, water, that's it, and it's like 50p a litre. But there are also the top end ones, like the sort of £2.50 a litre ones, the organic ones, etc., which not all of them, but some of them don't have any extras. So again, even with vegan products, you can, if look at the label and make choices based on that. It's not all vegan products that are bad. There are some that, when they say plant-based, they actually mean they're made out of plants rather than they're made out of plant derivatives.
Okay, thank you. And I'll make this the last question, because I think it is actually 8 o'clock. Sorry, we have gone on a little bit over time. So what can the Green Party do to lobby for GPs to get better nutritional training. I mean, that might be a question for within the Green Party, but I mean, to me, that does sound like a good idea because obviously a lot of these health issues that we're talking about, you were suggesting in the book that could actually be improved through diet. And yet, when you go to the doctor, that isn't something that they actually suggest. They don't ask you what you're eating. So,
Yeah.
how would we go about sort of getting GPs to get that better training?
Well, I mean, like you say, you probably know the answer to that better than I do. But if that's something that you as a group can lobby for, I think that would be an extremely valuable use of time because, as we've said this evening, women are likely to be turning up to the doctor with a variety of issues that we know historically and still today they may well be being dismissed for, fobbed off about, told to just suck it up. It's just part of being a woman. And even that aside, even if you're landing, with a good GP, I don't think that everyone is aware, for example, of the impact that diet can have on even on mental health. And women are twice as likely to have depression and twice as likely to have anxiety as men. So that's an awful lot of female people who are going to be turning up at doctors who could benefit from that doctor. As I've said earlier, not saying, oh, because again, that could evolve into a kind of a new way of fobbing people off. Or, you're just not eating the right stuff, love. Go and have some more carrots, and kind of diminishing the gravity of the problem. We need everything to be a holistic picture. For some women, we know that, like menopause, for example, like women taking HRT and women not taking HRT, both have a reduction in menopause symptoms if they switch away from a UPF towards a more sort of whole foods Mediterranean diet. So it's not an either or thing. But yeah, that would be absolutely amazing if the Green Party could do something about that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much. It's been, really, really fascinating. It's given us lots of food for thought. Sorry, I'll get another pun in there before we go. But I think we've all got things that we can actually go away, we can actually do to sort of help ourselves, and help the planet. And changes that are good for us, I think, as individuals, are also, good for the wider community of women and for society and the planet in general. So, shopping locally, less packaging, all those kind of knock-on effects. So, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.